Picture this. It is approximately 10,000 years ago, somewhere in the Fertile Crescent, the agricultural heartland of the ancient Near East, where humans are in the early, messy, experimental stages of figuring out that deliberately growing food is a more reliable survival strategy than wandering around hoping to find it. The settlement is small, the structures are rudimentary, the grain storage is working better than expected, which means the grain storage has attracted mice, which were not part of the plan, but which are very much part of the outcome. The mice are a problem. Not a catastrophic problem, not the kind that ends a settlement, but a consistent, grinding, resource-draining problem that nobody has a good solution for. You cannot watch the grain all night. You cannot individually catch every mouse that enters the storage area. You have tried things. The things have worked partially and temporarily. The mice keep coming back because the grain keeps being there. And the grain keeps being there because it has to be. In some estimates, ancient grain storage facilities could lose between 10 and 30% of their stores to rodent activity if left unmanaged. Not a minor footnote in a food-insecure world, but a potentially community-threatening caloric loss year after year. And then, one evening, a wildcat walks into the settlement. Not dramatically, not with any announcement. It simply walks in from the surrounding scrub with the particular quality of self-possession that cats have always carried. That specific combination of complete awareness of its surroundings and complete indifference to what those surroundings think of its presence. It looks around, it assesses the situation, it identifies the mice. And then it begins doing, in the middle of the human settlement, the thing it was doing before the human settlement existed. Hunting small rodents with the efficient, precise, absolutely uncomplicated expertise of a specialist organism operating in its optimal niche. The humans watch this. They do not chase the cat away. Why would they? The cat is solving the mouse problem. The cat is doing something useful without being asked, without being compensated, and without any apparent expectation of reciprocal obligation. The cat is welcome here, provisionally, pending further observation of its general intentions. The cat, for its part, has not asked for permission and is not particularly interested in whether permission is forthcoming. The mice are here, the cat is here. The arrangement makes sense from the cat's perspective and from the human's perspective, and nobody needed to negotiate it. This is how the oldest, strangest, most mutually convenient, and least examined interspecies relationship in human history began. Not through human decision to domesticate the cat. Not through selective breeding programs or deliberate training or the sustained human effort that shaped dogs from wolves across tens of thousands of years of intentional relationship management. The cat domesticated itself, moved into human space on its own initiative, for its own reasons, on its own timeline, and then used a specific and sophisticated set of biological and behavioral tools to make itself indispensable, comfortable, and eventually so embedded in human domestic life that the relationship has outlasted virtually every other feature of the ancient world in which it began. The cat did not get domesticated, the cat got comfortable. There is a difference, and that difference is what makes the entire story worth examining carefully and at length. Start with the genetics, because the genetics tell a story that surprises most people who encounter it. When researchers sequenced the genomes of domestic cats and compared them to their wild ancestor, Felis sylvestris libica, the Near Eastern wildcat, they found something fundamentally unusual. The genetic distance between domestic cats and wildcats is dramatically smaller than the genetic distance between domestic dogs and wolves. Dogs have been so thoroughly reshaped by domestication that their genome shows extensive signatures of selection across hundreds of genetic regions, reflecting the sustained, intensive, multi-thousand-year selective breeding process that transformed wolf into the extraordinary behavioral and morphological diversity of modern dog breeds. The domestic dog and the wolf, despite sharing recent common ancestry, are behaviorally and neurologically divergent in ways that reflect tens of thousands of years of intensive human shaping. Cat domestication left a much lighter genetic footprint. The regions of the cat genome showing signatures of selection are relatively few and relatively recent by evolutionary standards, and they cluster around specific functional categories. Genes involved in fear response and stress reactivity, genes related to memory and reward-associated learning, and genes connected to the ability to form positive associations with specific individuals in the environment. What this genetic signature is describing is not a wholesale biological transformation of the kind that produced the domestic dog. It is a targeted, specific modification of the parameters governing how the cat responds to human presence, reducing fear, increasing tolerance, enabling reward learning in the context of human interaction, without substantially altering the fundamental predatory, sensory, social, and behavioral architecture that the wildcat ancestor possessed. In practical terms, this means that the domestic cat is far closer to its wild ancestor than the domestic dog is to the wolf. A domestic cat that goes feral, that loses access to human care and reverts to independent living, becomes a competent, successful predator of small prey within its own lifetime, drawing on an intact predatory behavioral repertoire that domestication left essentially undamaged. Feral cat populations are an ecological crisis in multiple countries precisely because domestic cats revert to effective independent hunting so readily. A feral dog does not become a wolf. It becomes a dog living without humans, dependent on scavenging and struggling to execute the sophisticated cooperative predatory behaviors that wolf society required. The cat, in choosing the lighter touch of behavioral modification over the deeper structural transformation of full domestication, preserved its independence in a way that has defined the human-cat relationship ever since. This also explains something that every cat owner knows intuitively, and that every dog owner finds slightly baffling. Cats cannot be trained to the same degree or with the same reliability that dogs can. This is not because cats are less intelligent. Cat cognition research has found that cats perform comparably to dogs on many cognitive tasks and outperform them on certain spatial and object permanence tasks. It is because the dog's domestication removed the behavioral autonomy that the wolf possessed, replacing it with an orientation toward human social cues and human approval that makes dogs extraordinarily responsive to training. The cat's domestication left behavioral autonomy largely intact. The cat is not choosing not to come when called. The cat is assessing whether coming when called serves its current interests. This is a different cognitive relationship with human requests, and it is a direct consequence of a domestication process that modified the cat's fear response without modifying its fundamental decision-making independence. Now examine the behavioral toolkit that ancient wildcats brought to the human settlement encounter because it was specifically well-suited to the self-domestication process that followed. The Near Eastern wildcat had a combination of characteristics that, in retrospect, reads almost like a checklist for successful voluntary domestication. The wildcat's natural prey base, small rodents, birds, and other small animals, overlapped almost perfectly with the pest species that human agricultural settlements were generating in abundance. The cat was not being asked to adopt a new dietary strategy or hunt unfamiliar prey. It was being offered a higher density version of exactly what it already hunted in the wild, in a location that was predictable, consistent, and required no territorial patrolling to maintain. From the wildcat's foraging economics perspective, a grain storage facility full of mice was not a human settlement. It was an exceptional hunting territory with unusually reliable prey density. Hunting efficiency in that environment was dramatically higher than in the surrounding landscape, which means individual cats spending time near human settlements were getting more food per unit of hunting effort than cats hunting in the wild. The wildcat's solitary social structure was another asset in the domestication context. Pack-hunting carnivores that evolved complex cooperative hunting behaviors are behaviorally dependent on social structures that human environments disrupted. The wolf without its pack loses the cooperative hunting system that defined its ecological success. The cat was already a solitary hunter, already comfortable operating independently without a conspecific social network, already accustomed to establishing individual territories, and managing its own subsistence without cooperation. Moving into human space did not require abandoning a social structure the cat depended on. It required only adjusting the individual's tolerance for the specific large primate that was also occupying the space. The gradual narrowing of that tolerance, the selection across generations of cats living near human settlements for individuals that could maintain the necessary proximity to humans without the chronic stress response that would have made continued presence physiologically unsustainable, is what the genetic data about fear response and stress reactivity genes is describing. Chronic stress in animals produces measurable physiological consequences, including suppressed immune function, disrupted reproductive cycling, and reduced foraging efficiency. Cats that could not habituate to human proximity would have experienced exactly these consequences while attempting to exploit the human settlement food resource, reducing their competitive success and their reproductive output relative to cats with lower stress reactivity in human contexts. The cats that stayed were the cats that could stay without it costing them physiologically. Their offspring inherited that capacity. The population shifted. The vocalization story is where the cat's active role in managing the human relationship becomes most apparent and most fascinatingly strategic. Wild felids do not meow at each other as adults. This is a documented fact that surprises most people who hear it. By the way, if you want to go even deeper into the secret lives of ancient humans, I just launched a full course called The Secret Lives of Ancient Humans. 10 modules, 3+ hours of content covering everything we never talk about on YouTube. What they feared, how they communicated, what hunted them, and much more. Plus an exclusive PDF guide included. Link in the description. See you inside. The meow, that specific, variably pitched vocalization that domestic cats produce so readily and so frequently in human company, is functionally absent from the communication repertoire of adult wildcats interacting with other cats. Adult wildcats hiss, growl, chirp, trill, and produce a range of other vocalizations in feline social contexts. The meow, as domestic cats deploy it, appears to be something that cats developed specifically for communicating with humans. A vocalization channel evolved not for cat-to-cat communication, but for cat-to-human communication. Research on cat vocalizations has documented that cats produce meows across a remarkable range of pitches, durations, and urgency levels, and that human listeners, even people without specific experience with cats, are reliably accurate at inferring the communicative intent of different meows. An urgent, high-pitched meow associated with food solicitation is processed differently by human listeners than a lower, more relaxed meow produced in a social context. And cats modulate these characteristics based on what they are trying to communicate and to whom. The meow is not a fixed signal with a fixed meaning. It is a flexible, context-modulated vocalization system that domestic cats have apparently developed through generations of selecting vocalizations that produced desired human responses. A vocalization system that evolved in the context of the human relationship and for the purpose of managing human behavior. The solicitation purr takes this communicative sophistication further in ways that are genuinely remarkable. The ordinary purr that cats produce in states of comfort and contentment operates in a frequency range, approximately 25 to 50 Hz, that happens to overlap with frequencies documented to stimulate bone density maintenance and soft tissue healing in mammalian tissue. Researchers studying vibration therapy have found that exposure to frequencies in this range accelerates healing in bone and soft tissue injuries. Whether domestic cat purring evolved partly as a self-therapeutic mechanism, helping cats maintain bone density during the prolonged periods of rest that their hunting lifestyle involves, is an active research question. What is documented is that the purring frequency produces measurable physiological responses in nearby humans, including reduced heart rate, reduced blood pressure, and reduced stress hormone levels. The solicitation purr, the specific purring cats produce when soliciting food or attention from humans, contains an embedded higher frequency component in the 500 Hz range that ordinary contentment purring does not consistently include. Acoustic analysis has found that this embedded component produces in human listeners a response similar to the neurological response produced by infant crying, an urgency signal that the human nervous system processes as requiring response. Cats producing solicitation purrs with well-developed embedded components get fed faster than cats without them. This is documented across multiple studies. The cat has developed a purr with an acoustic component that activates the human caregiving response with a specificity that is not coincidental. It is the product of generations of selection for the vocalizations that worked most reliably on the human nervous system. The kneading behavior that cats exhibit, the rhythmic pressing of their paws against soft surfaces, accompanied by purring and the specific quality of contentment that makes cats look like they have reached some kind of enlightenment, is a retained juvenile behavior. Kittens knead against their mother's mammary glands to stimulate milk flow during nursing. Adult cats that knead appear to be expressing a retained infantile behavior in contexts of comfort and security, a form of behavioral neoteny in which the cat regresses toward the behavioral patterns of the nursing period when it feels safe and secure in its current environment. This behavioral neoteny is significant for understanding the human-cat relationship because it means that adult cats interacting with humans in domestic settings are, in behavioral terms, expressing the relationship patterns of an infant with its mother. The cat approaching its human owner with a raised tail, kneading the owner's lap, and purring in the solicitation frequency range is expressing a relationship structure, the infant-caregiver bond, that the human nervous system is specifically wired to respond to with nurturing behavior. The cat is not consciously deploying this, but the cats whose behavioral repertoire most effectively activated the human nurturing response were the cats that received the most care, the most food access, the most warmth and safety. The selection pressure was, across thousands of years, toward the behavioral profile that made humans want to take care of the cat. The humans on the other side of this were not passive recipients. They were active participants in the selection process, even without intending to be. The cats that received the most access to human space, the warmth of the hearth, the relative safety of indoor sleeping, protection from weather and predators, and the reliable food that human habitation generated, were the cats that humans found most tolerable and most appealing. Ancient humans who found certain cats less frightening, more pleasant to have around, more interesting to observe, were giving those cats preferential access to resources. The aesthetic and emotional preferences of ancient humans were operating as selection pressure on the cat population from the earliest days of the association. The physical characteristics that humans found most appealing in cats correlate substantially with the neotenic features that behavioral domestication produced as developmental byproducts: rounder faces, larger eyes relative to face size, softer and more varied vocalizations, more flexible body language expressing affiliation rather than threat. These are also the features of juvenile animals, and the human preference for them is consistent with the caregiving response that extended human parental investment evolved in our evolutionary history. Humans are predisposed to respond positively to infantile features and infantile behavioral signals. This is the biological foundation of the human nurturing instinct. Cats with more of these features were more likely to be welcomed into close proximity with humans, more likely to receive supplementary feeding, more likely to survive and reproduce in the human environment. The selection was not toward the most fearsome pest controller. It was increasingly toward the cat that produced the most positive human emotional and caregiving response. The ancient Egyptian relationship with cats provides the most extensively documented historical record of how completely the cat had executed its self-domestication strategy across several thousand years following the initial Near Eastern encounter. By the time of the Egyptian Middle Kingdom, roughly 4,000 years ago, cats were depicted in tomb paintings in positions of domestic intimacy that are essentially indistinguishable from how cats appear in modern homes and on modern social media. Sitting under chairs at family meals, being held on laps, wearing decorative collars, playing with toys, the imagery is immediate and recognizable across the entire distance of 4,000 years because the relationship being depicted is the same relationship. The elevation of the cat to sacred status in ancient Egypt is the most extraordinary outcome in the entire domestication story, and it is worth examining carefully for what it reveals about the effectiveness of the cat's strategy. The goddess Bastet, initially depicted as a lioness-headed deity associated with protection and warfare, later depicted as a domestic cat or cat-headed woman associated with home, fertility, and protection, became one of the most widely worshipped deities in the Egyptian pantheon. Harming a cat in ancient Egypt was punishable by death. Greek historian Herodotus recorded that Egyptians shaved their eyebrows in mourning when a household cat died. Cat mummies have been found in the millions, literally millions, at sites across Egypt, indicating that the practice of offering mummified cats at temples was so widespread and sustained that it constituted a significant element of religious practice across centuries of Egyptian history. The domestic cat went from uninvited grain storage visitor to legally protected deity's companion in approximately 5 to 6,000 years. Whatever the cat was doing, whatever combination of pest control utility, behavioral neoteny, vocalization sophistication, purring neurophysiology, and feline aesthetic that made ancient humans feel better in its presence. It worked well enough to produce one of the most complete reversals of power dynamic in any human-animal relationship in history. The pest controller became the deity's familiar. The uninvited guest became the sacred guest that could not be harmed without legal penalty. The modern domestic cat is the product of this entire accumulated strategy. The fear threshold modifications of early self-domestication, the vocalization development for human communication that no other felid independently achieved, the retention of juvenile behavioral patterns for expressing trust and comfort seeking with humans, the physical refinement toward neotenic characteristics that activate the human caregiving response, the solicitation purr with its embedded urgency frequency, and the cultural embedding across multiple civilizations that has made the cat the most numerically successful felide in evolutionary history. There are approximately 600 million domestic cats on Earth currently. There are approximately 20,000 lions. The wildcat that walked into the ancient grain storage facility and decided the arrangement suited it has, through the combined strategy of its descendants being useful and then being irresistible, achieved a population dominance that no amount of apex predator capability could have produced. Research into the health benefits of cat ownership has found consistent associations between cat ownership and reduced cardiovascular disease risk, lower incidence of heart attack in long-term studies, reduced anxiety and depression symptoms, and the specific stress reduction associated with petting a purring cat. The frequency of the purr, the tactile stimulation of petting, and the neurohormonal response to the positive social interaction with a cat together produce measurable physiological changes in the human nervous system. The cat has made itself therapeutic to the species that was initially useful to it as a provider of high-density hunting territory. Whether this is coincidence, the byproduct of a relationship that happened to produce mutual physiological benefit, or something closer to the cat continuing to optimize the relationship. It began 10,000 years ago, making itself not just tolerated and not just useful, but literally necessary to human well-being in measurable physiological terms, is a question that the available evidence does not definitively resolve. The cat would not tell you even if it knew. The cat, as it has always done, is simply making itself comfortable in the arrangement and letting the results speak. The cat did not get domesticated. The cat decided the terms. And it has been refining those terms with considerable biological sophistication ever since.